then today we're going to dive in to some more wisdom on a different topic from the book of Proverbs. But before we get there, I want to start something a little closer to here. And that's a little decade that a few of you remember. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands if you do, called the 1960s. I'm also not going to ask you to raise your hands if you don't remember it, but should. We're not going to go there. It's going to start like that. So the 60s gave us a lot of really incredible things, right? They gave us a man walking on the moon. They gave us the Beatles in music. They gave us Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show and Woodstock and the Civil Rights Movement. They also gave us one of the most iconic characters to ever appear in any movie. They gave us this guy. This is Bond. James Bond, right? This is probably one of the most enduring characters of all time. Many of you grew up watching James Bond. Bond came out in 61 with Dr. No, but actually didn't make it to blockbuster status until the 1964 movie Goldfinger. How many of y'all have seen Goldfinger, right? Bond is only as good as his greatest villain, and Auric Goldfinger is that he becomes the prototype on which they've based most of their later Bond movies. And this guy has got it all. He's a gold magnet, a gold smuggler who makes millions and millions of dollars, not just killing and extorting, but transporting and hoarding gold. And he's kind of that villain that you just love to hate, right? At one point, he's not just content to steal gold and to kill people for gold, but at one point, Goldfinger goes so far that he's willing to set off a nuclear device in Fort Knox, tainting all of America's gold, so his own is worth more money, right? And maybe I should have given you a spoilers there, but this came out in 1964, so you haven't seen it yet. I'm sorry, spoilers, but that's what happens, right? This guy is great. It's greed that drives him to kill and steal, to be willing to use nuclear weapons and really cause mass chaos and damage. And he personifies, in many ways, greed. He's the perfect villain for the 1960s, but he also might be the perfect villain today. Because I think we find that greed or lack of money or too much money, that all of our issues with money sometimes become issues of our own today, that sometimes these become the villains of our own lives today. And so today we're celebrating our graduates, and we're going to send you forth into the world, and some of you are going to find out real quick just how much power money has to either make our lives really, really painful or sometimes to free us up to do what we want to do. Adults, some of you are about to send a graduate out into the world, and you're going to help pay for college. If you pay more than 50%, you're not helping them, they're helping you, just as an aside. But you've already seen the role that finances can have on your own life, and maybe this is a place where you're grateful for wisdom. Maybe this is a place where many of us are still looking for wisdom. Now, I felt it in the room when I said the first word money, and so I just want to put a little disclaimer here. There's a lot of anxiety whenever we talk about money in church, and some of you are thinking, are we really doing a stewardship campaign right now? No. This is not a pledge drive. We're in good financial health. We've got a great group of people on our finance team. They've got us going in the right direction. You all are so generous. We're not doing this to guilt you into giving, and we're not going to talk about it that way. We're talking about money today because our faith intersects with our finances, or at least it can, and it's often better when it does. And we're talking about money today because for many of us, money is one of the biggest sources of stress and pain, and one of the biggest places where we kind of long for wisdom. And so I'm not going to end with a hard sell or a guilt trip. That's not going there. But we're going to talk about money because the Bible has a lot to say about money in a way that brings us a little bit of hope. So for many of us, this is such a tough topic that we don't talk about it at home. This is something that many of us, we get away from home and we don't fully understand all the ins and outs of much more than our bank account. We want it to stay positive, and we hope it does, but at least for me, when I got away from home, kind of my plan for keeping the bank account positive was like pray really, really hard and don't check it too often, and hopefully it stays, right? Anybody else do that occasionally? You don't have to raise your hands, but some of us don't know where to turn for advice. And so, maybe we have parents that educate us on finance, and that's awesome. Maybe we don't. Maybe we learn what we know about money because we make bad decisions, and we learn the hard way. Maybe we learn because we have to resort to Googling for whatever information we can and trusting what we see online. Maybe we're not sure where we find out how to have sound financial practices. So we're going to talk about one of the places that I think gives us some wisdom here, and it's kind of high-level wisdom. I'm not going to tell you exactly what stocks to invest in. That's not this type of church. But we're going to talk about just kind of what the Bible has to say about money. And my hope is that this is kind of low stress and easy, and this is something that's practical and useful. So this past week when I was preparing for this sermon, I found 100 different verses in the book of Proverbs alone on wisdom and finances. Just practical advice on how we might live and what we might do with money. And 100 verses is more than we can cover today. It's probably about what we could cover in a year. But I want to look at kind of three broad categories that pop up again and again and again. And this is advice, by the way, that's going to work for money, but it's also going to cross over into other areas. So for those of you that are in school still, maybe are students who haven't graduated yet, this is advice for how we pursue grades. For those of you that are in relationships and hoping for 40 years like Mike and Margie, this is something that is good advice for our relationships. This is advice that's practical and applicable to every area of our life, but we're going to talk about it in the context of money. And the first question that I want to tackle, the first topic is kind of what's the foundation? Where does money come from? And Proverbs has a lot to say about this. This is Proverbs 13:11. Wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappears, and wealth from hard work grows over time. The Bible talks a lot about consistent hard work, about the value of showing up, working hard, living within our means. Now, in some ways, it's tempting to go for a quick route to whatever funds we can find, to kind of play the lottery and hope we get rich quick. And that's kind of a human condition issue, a human temptation. It's human nature to look for shortcuts. It's just dangerous to take them. We found that out in 2008 when the economy kind of hit a recession because people at all levels, including myself, looked for ways that we could find more money than probably we'd earned yet. And things kind of went downhill. Looking for shortcuts is a human temptation. Looking for that great big plan is a human nature issue. And I learned this concept actually when grades, not money, were my primary currency. And so I was a student at K-State. Nate, nice job. I wore my purple for you today, buddy. I was finishing up my double major in English and history, and I had two majors, which were both kind of paper heavy, which meant I had more than 50 pages of paper due the last week of school. Now, a wise person who'd worked hard and been consistent would have kind of written a couple pages every day, and by the end, you would have been nice and low stress and everything else. But I had a plan. And I should have done that, but I had this genius get-done-quick plan where I was going to cram everything into this marathon creativity session of like 2 to 3 days. I was just going to bang out like 50 pages of paper all at once. And so a few days before all of this was due, I had 0 pages written, but I was ready. And so I went to my favorite coffee shop, a little place called Radina's in Aggieville, and I went in and I got 2 cups of coffee. They have 2 24-ounce cups of coffee, and so this is a 12-ounce cup of coffee. This is what many of you are drinking right now, so 12, 24, there's 1 cup, right? But I got 2 of them, so 48 ounces of coffee, right? And I want to help you. Some of you aren't numbers people, but we're going to go through this. 24 ounces of coffee, which I've had at least that much by today. 24 ounces is 300 milligrams of caffeine. That's about a little more than most of you will drink on average in a day. And so I had 2 of those, and so that should have been 600 milligrams of caffeine, right? Like you tracking so far, we're at 600? Okay. But the plan was to go a little farther. See, I thought instead of just working a few hours and then sleeping and getting up the next day and working a few hours, what if I just caffeined up all the way and then got it all done in one 50-page caffeine blitz? And so instead of filling them up with coffee, this is coffee today, by the way, I decided that I would fill up my 48 fluid ounces with espresso. I did the math for you. 1 ounce of espresso has 63 milligrams of caffeine. So one 24-ounce cup has 1,512 milligrams of caffeine. And since I had 2, I had a little over 3,000 milligrams of caffeine instead of the more than recommended 600. There were side effects. I didn't sleep for a few days. I vomited a little bit of blood, and when I got one of those papers back with the grade on it, and there was a lot of red. There was more red on this paper than there was black ink on the page, right? When I got one of those papers back, I actually took it, and instead of just throwing it in the trash, like, Mom wasn't going to hang this on her fridge. Like, that wasn't happening. Instead of just throwing it in the trash, I decided to ceremonially burn this piece of paper so that no one else could ever see it. It was not a wise decision. Sometimes going for those shortcuts, that get-rich-quick thing, that doesn't work. And we find that out. In a society where it's increasingly tempting to go for the shortcut, one of the biggest things we can do as Christians is show people the value of honest, hard, grinding out work. We're going to get into a little more of how that works in a bit. We make money through hard work and instead of shortcuts, but what do we do with the money we make? And I'm moving kind of quick here, I'm sorry. This is Proverbs 21:17. Those who love pleasure become poor, and those who love wine and luxury will never be rich. And the book of Proverbs repeats this theme again and again and again. Live within your means. And many of you know this, but it's good to hear it again. See, most of us have found that it's not just how much we make that impacts our finances, but it's also how we keep or what we do with what we make. Many of us learn this firsthand as the average American has about $5,700 of credit card debt. That's not including house and car. That's just, spending and getting a little behind a little bit at a time. And that's the average. Most of us are somewhere a little above or below that. Living within our means building up a savings fund. It means saving because we know that someday something's going to happen. Someday the boiler is going to go out or the roof's going to need repairs. And that's tough for a lot of us. But if we don't do it, we find that money becomes a master. And we've got to do things just to pay our debts. And little by little, we get farther behind. And that brings us to a third theme and a question. And what's the point of money to begin with? And this question sometimes is the really convicting one, but it's actually, I think, freeing when we think about it a certain way. Proverbs talks about this perspective called generosity, and it works like this. This is Proverbs 3:27. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it, when it's in your power to help them. And then Proverbs 11:25, the generous will prosper, and those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. See, what I love about this perspective is that it frees us from that rat race, where we're always spending whatever we have to try and keep up with everybody around us and what they have. It's tempting, and at least I've been there a few times myself, where money becomes kind of our marker and my scorecard. How am I keeping up with everybody around me? And when our refreshment, our relief, and our value is tracked by how we do relative to everyone else, there's always somebody who has more. But what happens if money becomes something else? If we stop trying to refresh ourselves by how we compare to others and start looking at how we can use it to refresh others around us. If it goes from a burden we bear to money becomes a tool that we wield. What if we become obsessed with generosity? And this is the part where some of you are probably internally rolling your eyes because that sounds really trite, right? Like, of course a pastor would say that. And so here's Seth Godin. He's written 18 books, and he's one of the most respected writers of our modern era. If you search for just Seth on Google, he's the first thing that pops up. This is him speaking. Once you have enough for beans and rice and taking care of your family and a few other things, money is just a story. You can tell yourself any story you want about money, and it's better to tell yourself a story that you can happily live with. I don't know his faith, but I do know that his wisdom here, not biblical wisdom, but reflects the Bible. Money tells a story. And it's a story that we can use to refresh others or to get exhausted ourselves trying to keep up. So here's how we saw this in our church a little bit recently. We have a third grade Bible class, or a kids' Bible class, and we teach elementary school kids to read their Bibles. And an anonymous donor thought that was awesome, and so they paid for these Bibles to make sure that kids had Bibles. And that's a great story, to refresh kids and to train kids. And because they did that, we had some funds left that the kids could use. And so we went to the kids and we kind of, you just learned to read your Bible and you have Bibles. Let's see how much this has impacted your life. And so Melissa asked him, if you had a little bit of money, what would you do? Would you throw a party for yourselves or buy everybody toys, or what would you do? And this class talked about it, and these little, third and fourth and fifth graders, and they decided that God was calling them to bless other people like someone had blessed them. And so they wanted that to be the story of their class, and they voted, and the Kids Bible 101 class decided to put some of the money towards the Leavenworth County Humane Society because they wanted to make sure that animals were cared for. And they wanted to put some of it towards the United Methodist Committee on Relief because when kids like them go through tragedies like tornadoes and hurricanes, they want somebody to refresh them. That was the story our kids wanted to tell. And so we're going to tell our own story today. And in a second, we're going to have communion, and we believe this is one of the things that refreshes our souls and how we experience God's presence in our life. It's a gift that God gives us, and so today we're going to give a gift to refresh others. And so every time we take communion, we take this thing called the discretionary offering, and that just goes towards people in our community who need a little bit of help. And we're going to do something with that today. See, it's the end of the school year, and there's about $2,000 in outstanding lunch accounts. And we live in a community where there's a pretty high number of kids who qualify for free or reduced lunch. And after May 1st, kids can't go negative. The school's got to make sure that they end with a positive value there, even if that means that kids go a little bit hungry. And so we're going to take a special offering today just to help our schools and help our kids. And Kevin's putting it up right now. It's going to be right in the middle. We're going to work through our Backpack Buddies program or through our schools, but we're going to find a way to feed kids. And so as we take communion, we'll do our normal communion. But I wanted to give you all a chance to respond. Because for many of us, money is a source of stress, and we just don't really know where to look for wisdom. Or sometimes it becomes a master, and we get in debt, and we have to work so hard to catch up. But what happens if it becomes a tool? And a tool we use to refresh others, to tell a story of a church, starting with the kids on up, that's going to make whatever necessary possible to feed and care for our neighbors and to show hope for our neighbors.